Linda Parker never imagined that a single Tuesday evening could unravel her confidence so completely. The Hearth and Harbor Cafe in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, had always felt like a safe corner of the world to her, a place where the scent of warm bread drifted through the room and the soft murmur of familiar voices wrapped around visitors like a comforting shawl. The old wooden beams along the ceiling held stories from decades past, and the glow from the hanging lights reflected off the windows that faced the quiet harbor. It was a place that made strangers feel like neighbors. Yet on this particular evening, Linda felt more alone than she had in years. She had chosen her outfit carefully earlier that day, tugging gently at the sleeves of her deep green dress as she checked herself in the hallway mirror. The color reminded her of pine forests, after rain calm and steady. She wanted to appear put together, hopeful, even as she stepped once again into the world of first dates. Mason Turner had seemed polite in messages, charming even, and Linda had allowed herself a small spark of excitement. Being 41 and long past the fluttery confidence of youth, she had learned to guard her expectations. Still, she carried a quiet hope tucked behind her ribs as she walked into the cafe that evening. But hopes can bruise as easily as hearts. Mason arrived 10 minutes late, brushing off his delay with a dismissive wave before settling into the seat across from her. From the first moment, something in his eyes shifted as he looked at her, a flicker that hardened into disappointment. Linda tried to fill the silence with gentle conversation about the harbor, the summer events, the fresh-baked pastries the cafe was known for, but he responded with clipped phrases that landed like cold stones on the table between them. She sensed the moment coming before it arrived, the way one senses a gathering storm long before the first drop of rain. When his words finally spilled out sharp and careless, Linda felt as though the room tilted slightly. He spoke about her appearance with the detached tone of someone reviewing a faulty item in a store. He said she was not what he expected. He said he preferred women who were more fit. The words came without hesitation, without thought for the person sitting across from him, with her hands folded tightly in her lap, trying to keep them from trembling. It was as if he believed cruelty was simply honesty spoken without a filter. Conversations around them softened into a blur, the clink of cutlery melting into a distant hum as Linda's chest tightened. Her breath stuttered the way it used to when she was a teenager, trying to hide tears after a harsh comment from classmates. It amazed her how grown women could still be thrown back into the old wounds of their youth with just a few reckless words. She stared down at the untouched glass of water in front of her, the surface trembling slightly as she tried to steady her hands. Her dress, which had made her feel beautiful just an hour earlier now, felt like a reminder that she had misjudged herself once again. That she had dared to imagine she belonged in a place of possibility. Shame crept up her neck, warm and insistent, tightening around her like an unwelcome visitor. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting each inhale, willing herself not to break in front of a man who saw her worth as something measured only on the surface. She longed to disappear, to slip out of the cafe and back into the quiet safety of her apartment. Yet her legs seemed unwilling to move, rooted by a swell of hurt and disbelief. A few patrons had started to glance their way, not with judgment, but with a subtle concern that made Linda's cheeks burn even hotter. She lowered her gaze, hoping to escape their notice, wishing the evening could be rolled back like a page turned too quickly. If she had known how Mason would speak to her, she would never have agreed to meet him. She would have stayed home with a cup of tea, and her soft knitted throw familiar and forgiving companions who asked for nothing in return. But life, she would later learn, often allows painful moments to sit beside extraordinary ones. And sometimes heartbreak is simply the doorway through which kindness enters. Linda did not yet know that someone else in the cafe had been listening. She did not know that in just a few breaths her entire path would shift. Tonight, she thought she was losing something. Soon she would discover she was gaining far more than she imagined. Samuel Hayes had been sitting alone in a corner booth, a familiar place where the sunlight from the harbor windows always stretched across the table by early evening. He often came to Hearth and Harbor Cafe on Tuesdays, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of the room and the gentle voices of neighbors who greeted each other without hurry. On most nights, he kept to himself, sipping coffee while sketching ideas for small renovation projects. But tonight his pencil lay untouched. His attention had been pulled instead to the uneasy exchange at the table beside him. He had noticed Linda the moment she walked in. Not because of her dress or her hair, but because she carried a quiet nervousness that felt familiar. The kind of nervousness people wear when they have been disappointed too many times yet still force themselves to hope once more. Samuel recognized that feeling the way a lighthouse recognizes early fog. He understood uncertainty. He understood trying again even when trying hurt. From his booth he watched her smile politely at the man who joined her. He watched her straighten her shoulders when he spoke without warmth. He saw how she tried to make conversation, how she reached for kind thoughts to fill the growing emptiness at the table. And then he saw the moment her face changed. The moment Mason said something sharp enough to slice through her composure. Samuel did not hear the exact words at first, only the tone. Hard. Careless. The sort of tone a person used when they believed themselves superior. It was a tone he had heard during the hardest seasons of his own life, when grief had made him vulnerable to the careless opinions of others. The cafe fell quieter as Mason's voice rose just enough for nearby tables to hear pieces of his cruel monologue. Samuel saw Linda's shoulders tighten, her breath hitch, her hands fold together as if she were trying to hold herself steady against a storm she had not invited. There was something deeply wrong about watching another human shrink beneath words that should never be spoken. Something that stirred a heaviness in Samuel's chest, the kind that would not let him sit still. He told himself to wait to see if the situation resolved. But Mason continued, and the longer Samuel watched, the clearer it became that Linda would leave this cafe believing the lies of a man who had no right to shape her sense of self. A quiet fire stirred within him, a fire born not of anger alone, but of memory. He remembered the early months after his wife passed, remembered the unkind comments from people who meant well but spoke without understanding, remembered standing in the cereal aisle with his daughter in tears because someone had made an offhand remark about single fathers who looked tired and unprepared. Words had weight. That truth had carved itself into his heart the way wind shapes the cliffs along the coast. When Mason pushed back his chair with a harsh scrape and tossed a bill onto the table, Samuel felt something inside him settle into place. Not anger. Not bravado. Something more grounded. A decision. He rose slowly, letting his height unfold in a calm and steady manner. His boots made a quiet thud against the wooden floor, the kind of sound that drew attention without needing force. The conversations around the room softened as people sensed the shift in the air. The staff behind the counter paused in their movements. Even the harbor wind seemed to still against the windows. Samuel walked toward the table with the same quiet resolve he used to carry when stepping into a burning building long ago. Not rushed. Not reckless. Simply certain that someone needed to take a stand. Mason had turned away from Linda and was adjusting his jacket when Samuel spoke. His voice was steady, low, and controlled, carrying the kind of authority a person earns through hardship rather than ego. The words were simple. They asked Mason to stop. They asked him to leave her alone. Samuel did not raise his voice. He did not square his shoulders or try to intimidate. Instead, he stood with a calm stillness that made the room watch in careful silence. Linda looked up, startled, tears clinging to her lashes. Their eyes met for the first time. In that instant, Samuel saw more than sadness. He saw exhaustion, the kind that forms slowly from years of trying to be enough in a world quick to judge. And in that same moment, Linda saw something in him too. Not pity. Not intrusion. Something steadier. Something protective without being possessive. Mason hesitated. His confidence faltered. When faced with someone who carried quiet strength rather than loud bravado, his cruelty shrank. He muttered a few defensive phrases, but they rang hollow in the presence of Samuel's resolve. Slowly, with a huff meant to save face, Mason turned and walked toward the door, leaving behind the bitter scent of insult and cheap bravado. A long silence followed. Then the cafe breathed again. Samuel pulled out the chair across from Linda with a quiet care as though he feared the slightest sudden movement might cause her to shatter completely. He did not assume the seat. Instead, he paused, his hand resting lightly on the back of the chair, his eyes meeting hers with a gentleness that steadied the tremble in her breath. "May I sit?" he asked, his tone soft enough to be mistaken for a whisper. It was not a question of authority, but of respect. Linda nodded, unable to trust her voice, and Samuel eased into the chair as though entering a sacred space. Up close, Linda noticed details she had not seen before. The faint silver at his temples, the work-worn hands that looked capable of both heavy labor and delicate tasks. The quiet sadness behind his steady brown eyes, a sadness not sharp like hers, but settled like an old river running beneath the surface. He reached for a napkin from the holder and offered it to her, waiting silently as she dabbed at the black streaks trailing down her cheeks. He did not rush her. He did not fill the air with needless chatter. He simply allowed her to settle into herself again. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said finally, his voice low but firm. "No one should speak to another person the way he spoke to you." Linda swallowed her throat tight. "I must look awful," she murmured, staring down at the table. Her fingers twisted the napkin out of habit, the way she often did when nerves overwhelmed her. Samuel shook his head slowly. "You look like someone who was hurt by words that should never have been spoken." For a moment, they sat without speaking, letting the soft hum of the cafe fill the quiet. A server passed by, offering a hesitant smile toward Linda, the kind that carried sympathy without intrusion. The scent of baked tomatoes and fresh herbs drifted from the kitchen, a warmth that seemed to settle around them like a blanket. Samuel rested his hands on the table, palms open, a gesture that showed he meant no harm. "My name is Samuel Hayes." Linda managed a faint smile. "Linda Parker." He repeated the name gently, as though it deserved tenderness after the way Mason had spoken it earlier. He studied her quietly for a moment, not in the way someone judges, but in the way someone listens with their eyes. Then, with a thoughtful pause, he asked, "When was the last time you truly ate something comforting, something that made you feel cared for, not something you picked at out of politeness or nerves?" The question startled a small, almost disbelieving laugh from Linda. She sniffed lightly and replied, "I ordered a salad earlier, but I was too anxious to eat it." "First date tension, I guess." Samuel nodded as if he understood more than she had said aloud. It showed in the softening of his gaze, a flicker of recognition that made Linda wonder what memories of his own were rising behind his eyes. He took a breath, then spoke as though offering her a gentle escape. "How about we start this evening over, pretend none of the last 20 minutes happened?" He offered a small, warm smile. I am Samuel, and I was just about to order the best baked haddock in all of New Hampshire. Would you join me? No expectations. Just two people sharing a meal." Linda hesitated, her fingers tightening on the napkin. "Why would you do that for someone you barely know?" she asked, her voice small. Samuel exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting briefly toward the window where the harbor lights glimmered against the darkening sky. "Because I have an 8-year-old daughter, Abby," he said. "And last month she came home crying because some kids at school made fun of her thrift store jacket. I told her kindness matters more than cruelty, that we must stand up for one another. Tonight made me realize I cannot ask her to be brave if I'm not willing to show her what bravery looks like." Something in Linda's chest loosened just a little. A gentle ache, but one that felt like the beginning of healing rather than hurt. She pictured a little girl clinging to a worn jacket, and the image struck her heart with unexpected tenderness. Before she could respond, a server approached with 2 plates of steaming baked haddock, placing them in front of Samuel and Linda with a kind smile. "On the house tonight," he said softly, offering a wink as he moved away. Samuel lifted his fork. "The food here really does heal hearts," he said with quiet certainty. Linda breathed in the aroma, letting its warmth settle inside her. For the first time all evening, she felt a small flicker of comfort. Samuel took a slow breath before telling Linda something he rarely shared with anyone outside his closest circle. As he spoke, his voice carried a mix of strength and quiet vulnerability, the kind that suggested he had learned to keep grief folded neatly inside his heart. He told her he had once been a firefighter, the kind who ran into danger without hesitation, who believed he could shoulder any burden if it meant someone else would be safe. But years ago, an injury during a rescue had forced him to step away from the work he loved. His shoulder had never fully healed, and the doctor had said the risk was too great to continue. Losing that part of his life had felt like losing a piece of himself. Linda listened closely, her earlier hurt softening into empathy. She could sense how deeply the change had affected him, how it had shaken the foundation of his sense of purpose. Yet there was something admirable in the way he spoke about it. No bitterness. Only acceptance and a desire to build something meaningful from the pieces he still held. He shared that after leaving the fire department, he had turned to design and renovation. He enjoyed working with old homes around Portsmouth, restoring them with care, giving new life to structures that had weathered storms and stood the test of time. Linda found the idea fitting. There was something symbolic about someone who rebuilt damaged places for a living while carrying his own quiet scars. Then Samuel paused, as if preparing himself before entering a deeper part of the story. He told her he had been married once and that he had loved his wife deeply. Her name was Mary, and she had possessed a laugh that filled every space it touched. She passed away 3 years earlier due to sudden heart complications. The day he lost her felt like a tide that had pulled him under without warning. He described waking each morning to a house that felt too still, standing in a kitchen where her absence echoed off every surface, and wondering how he would guide their daughter through grief when he could barely breathe through his own. It was when he mentioned Abby that his voice changed. A gentle pride rose within it, mingled with tenderness and sorrow. He described an 8-year-old with curious eyes, wild curls, and a determined little spirit. She loved drawing pictures of lighthouses and collecting polished stones from the beach. She asked questions about everything and filled their home with a softness that made healing feel possible, even on the hardest days. She was the bright light that kept him moving forward, even when life felt unbearably heavy. As he spoke about Abby, something in Linda warmed. She could imagine the little girl's small hands wrapped around a cluster of seashells, eyes lifted in trust toward her father. The image tugged at something deep inside her, something protective and gentle. She admired the way Samuel talked about his daughter with such devotion, how every decision he made seemed rooted in his desire to help her feel safe and cherished. The baked haddock before them cooled slowly as the conversation deepened. Neither hurried. Neither seemed concerned about time. The world around them continued in its usual rhythm, servers carrying trays, dishes clinking faintly, the harbor breeze brushing softly against the windows. Yet at their small table it felt as though a quiet pocket of peace had settled, giving them room to speak without fear of judgment. Linda found herself sharing small pieces of her own life in return. Not the heaviest memories yet, but enough to show Samuel she trusted him. She told him about her work in the newborn unit, about her love for caring for fragile infants, about the long hours that often left her exhausted but fulfilled. He listened with genuine interest, nodding thoughtfully as she explained how she sometimes sang softly to the babies when the nights grew long. The tenderness in her voice reached him in a place he had not expected. As their plates emptied and the sky deepened into a quiet blue outside, Linda realized something had shifted inside her. She had arrived feeling alone and wounded, unsure of her worth. Yet sitting here with Samuel, hearing his story, she felt the smallest spark of connection. A gentle reassurance that even broken lives could meet in places of warmth, and that sometimes strangers became guides toward new beginnings. Samuel sat with his hands folded loosely on the table, studying Linda with a calm steadiness that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in years. After sharing so much of his own life, he wanted her to know that the space between them was safe, that she was allowed to bring her own truth into it. The gentle light from the overhead lamps softened the lines of his face, making him look almost carved from patience itself. For the first time that evening, Linda felt her breath ease. She lifted her gaze, unsure where to begin, then let the words rise slowly from the place where hurt had been sitting for too long. She told Samuel that she had once been engaged, told him that the man she had planned to marry never understood gentleness. Instead, he had measured her worth by the firmness of her waist, the way her clothes fit the number on a scale that always seemed to carry more gravity than any kindness she offered. His criticisms were never shouted. They came in small, steady drops that soaked into her until she no longer knew where her own thoughts ended and his began. She said she had left him, but it had taken courage she barely recognized as her own. She said that every date since then had felt like a test she was destined to fail. Samuel listened intently, not interrupting, not offering quick reassurances meant to gloss over her pain. He took in every word with a solemn understanding that came from his own history of loss. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment as though honoring what she had just shared before speaking. His voice held a firm note when he finally replied. He said that no part of her story made her less worthy, that the opinions of men who valued appearances over character were reflections of their own emptiness, not hers. He said she deserved gentleness. She deserved someone who looked at her and saw a woman who had endured much and still managed to offer care and kindness to the world. Linda felt tears prick again, but these were different from the tears earlier that night. These carried relief. These came from hearing words that settled into the bruised places inside her with surprising softness. She brushed at her cheeks gently and drew a slow breath, letting the warmth of Samuel's presence reach her. The cafe around them had grown quieter as the evening deepened. A couple by the window had begun gathering their coats. A server wiped a nearby table with slow, circular motions. The scent of warm bread faded, replaced by the soft sweetness of pastries cooling on the counter. Music drifted through the room, low and steady like a heartbeat stitched into the air. Linda found comfort in the ordinary sounds, a reminder that even difficult moments lived among simple ones. Samuel reached out, resting his hands lightly on the table between them, not touching her but offering steady ground if she needed it. He asked if she had eaten well lately, or if she had fallen into the familiar pattern many people did when sadness crept in, nibbling at small meals or skipping them entirely. Linda managed a small laugh, shy and fragile. She admitted she had spent many evenings pushing food around her plate instead of eating it. Anxiety did that to her, especially before a first date. Samuel nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. He said that grief and insecurity could steal a person's appetite in ways that felt invisible until someone gently pointed it out. He said she deserved meals that comforted her, meals she enjoyed without shame or fear of judgment. He added that sitting with someone over warm food could be its own kind of healing, a reminder that the body and heart often needed the same thing, simple care offered consistently. Linda felt the truth of his words settle inside her. She realized she had not felt judged once during their conversation. Not for her dress, not for her stories, not for her tears. The ease between them felt unfamiliar but deeply welcome, like returning to a quiet porch after a long day. Through the window behind Samuel, the harbor lights shimmered across the dark water, each reflection trembling slightly with the movement of the tide. Linda watched them and felt something loosen in her chest. A small opening. A quiet possibility. She did not know yet where this evening would lead. She only knew that the hurt she carried felt a little lighter with Samuel sitting across from her, offering steady presence instead of criticism, understanding instead of judgment. For the first time in a long while, she began to imagine that healing might not be something she had to do alone. Samuel walked with Linda to the small parking lot behind the cafe, the evening air cool enough to bring a faint pink to her cheeks. The harbor wind carried the scent of salt and distant pine, a gentle reminder that the world held more softness than the sharp words she had endured earlier. Linda kept her hands tucked together as they walked, suddenly shy now that the intensity of the moment inside the cafe had softened into quiet night. They stood near her car for a breath longer than necessary, neither wanting to rush the fragile peace that had settled between them. Linda felt the ache of the earlier humiliation still lingering, yet it no longer pressed so heavily against her ribs. Speaking with Samuel had eased something that had tightened inside her for far too long. She felt steadier, as though his calm presence had given her a small piece of herself back. Samuel took a gentle step closer, careful not to startle her. His voice carried the same warm steadiness that had comforted her inside the cafe. He told her that meeting new people was never easy, especially after past hurts. He said she had shown real courage simply by showing up tonight. Linda felt her eyes heat again, but this time she steadied herself and breathed slowly, letting his words settle. They exchanged numbers before parting. Samuel wrote his neatly on a small receipt from his pocket and handed it to her with a thoughtful look. Linda entered hers into his phone. The moment was simple, yet it felt meaningful, as though they were each placing a small stone on the beginning of a shared path. Linda placed the receipt carefully in her bag, treating it with more care than she expected. The next morning, she woke with a heaviness that clung to her chest. Memories of Mason's voice returned in sharp flashes that made her pause at the edge of her bed. She touched the fabric of her green dress folded neatly over a chair and felt a wave of doubt rise again. Yet this time, the memory of Samuel's steady eyes and the quiet tenderness in his voice rose beside it, softening the harshness of the earlier sting. Her phone chimed. A message. Just a simple note from Samuel. He hoped she had gotten home safely. He wished her a gentle morning. And he sent a picture that made her smile despite the ache inside her. It showed a steaming cup of coffee beside a tiny drawing clearly made by a child. A smiling stick figure in a bright dress stood next to a taller one with big curly hair, and beneath it in Abby's shaky handwriting were the words, "Happy Tuesday, friend." Linda pressed a hand lightly to her chest. Simple kindness could be astonishing in its strength. Over the next few days, Samuel sent short messages, each one gentle and carefully spaced. He never pushed. He sent a photo of Abby's latest drawing, a small lighthouse with beams stretching out across the paper. He sent a small joke about tripping over a toolbox that morning. He sent a simple question about her shift at the hospital. Nothing demanding. Nothing that required emotional labor she did not yet have to give. Linda typed responses more than once. She wrote, "Thank you." She wrote that the drawing was sweet. She wrote that she hoped his shoulder was not too sore after the long day of work. Each time she hesitated, the words of her past hurts still clung tightly inside her, whispering that she was not enough. That kindness given today might turn to disappointment tomorrow. So she erased the messages and set the phone aside. By the end of the week, Samuel sent another note. He said he hoped she was doing all right. He said he understood if she needed space. He added that he would continue wishing her gentle days whether she responded or not. And though his message carried patience, Linda could sense a faint thread of worry in the words, as though he feared she might be slipping into the quiet corners where sadness often hides. Linda set her phone down and closed her eyes. She did not know yet how to answer, or even if she had the strength to. But beneath the lingering uncertainty, a quiet truth began to grow. Even in silence, Samuel's kindness was reaching her, softening the edges of the pain she kept tucked away. For the first time in months, she allowed herself the smallest hope that someone could care without asking anything in return, and that perhaps healing did not require perfection, only presence. Linda moved through the next several days as though she were walking underwater, each step heavy and slow. The hospital's bright hallways felt too loud for her weary heart, and even the gentle chime of monitors made her flinch. She kept her head down during her shifts, offering soft smiles to coworkers and families, doing her best to tend to the fragile babies in the newborn unit with the tenderness they deserved. But inside, the ache lingered. Shame has a way of echoing long after the words that created it have faded, and Mason's voice had carved a space in her mind she could not seem to close. Samuel's messages waited quietly on her phone, each one patient and warm. Yet each time she saw his name appear on her screen, something inside her tightened. She worried that responding would expose her sadness, that if she let him close, he might one day see her the way Mason had, the way her former fiancé had. She feared believing in kindness only to learn it was temporary. So she stayed silent. On the fourth evening, her phone buzzed again. This time it was not a text. It was a voicemail. Linda hesitated before pressing play. Samuel's voice flowed through the speaker, warm but uncertain, as though he did not want to intrude, yet could not bear to let her drift away unexplained. "Linda," he began quietly, "I hope you are all right. I know it has only been a short time since we met, but I could sense you carry more than you let on. And I just wanted you to know you do not have to walk through it alone." There was a small pause, the kind that comes when someone chooses honesty over comfort. "I might be completely wrong, and if I am, feel free to ignore this message. But Tuesday meant something to me. Not in a heavy way, not in a romantic way. Just in a human way. It felt like two people who understand pain sharing a moment that mattered." She could hear him exhale softly. "Grief says strange things in our heads," he continued. "It tells us we are too much or not enough. After my wife passed, I heard her voice everywhere, even though it was not really her. It was guilt, fear. So I understand a little if you are trying to sort through your own thoughts right now. If you ever want to talk or sit in silence or just be near someone who will not judge, I am here. No pressure, no expectations. Just here." Linda's eyes filled as she listened to the last few seconds of the message. "And if you do not want contact, that is all right too. I just wanted you to know someone is thinking of you tonight. Sleep well, Linda." The voicemail ended, but the warmth of his words lingered like a hand resting gently on her shoulder. She replayed the message once, then again, and again, 17 times before the evening ended. Still, she did not respond. A week passed. Then 2. Samuel's messages grew further apart, showing respect for her, quiet, but carrying a tender uncertainty. Linda felt each one in her chest. She wanted to reply, wanted to say she cared, wanted to ask how Abby was doing, whether Samuel had tried the new bakery by the harbor he had mentioned once. But shame held her tightly, whispering that she did not deserve a man with that much gentleness in his heart. That if she stepped closer, she would only disappoint him. She avoided the grocery store near his favorite renovation shop. She took different routes to work. She even avoided looking toward the cafe when she drove past it, as though proximity to kindness might expose all the feelings she was not ready to face. 3 full weeks passed before her best friend Rachel showed up at her apartment unannounced. Rachel stepped inside with her usual confidence bags under her eyes from long hospital shifts, but a spark of determination in her expression. "Enough," Rachel said without hesitation. "You have been hiding. You have been quiet. And you look like you have not slept in days. Tell me what happened." Linda tried to brush it off, but the words caught in her throat. So she told Rachel everything. The entire evening. The humiliation. Samuel's kindness. The dinner. His daughter's drawing. The voicemail she kept replaying. The silence she now regretted more than she could admit. Rachel listened patiently, her arms crossed, her face softening as the story unfolded. When Linda finished, Rachel blinked at her in disbelief. "Linda Marie Parker," she said firmly, "you wonderful, stubborn woman." That man did not show pity. Pity does not leave gentle voicemails. Pity does not send drawings from his child or check in without expecting anything back. That is not pity. That is care. Linda wiped her eyes. "You are scared," Rachel continued, "but being scared does not mean you are unworthy. Let someone care about you. Just once. You might be surprised by what follows." Her words cracked something open in Linda, a small space where courage might grow. That night, as rain tapped softly against her window, she listened to Samuel's voicemail one more time. And for the first time since that hard Tuesday evening, she felt the faintest pull toward healing. A quiet truth settled inside her. Maybe kindness was not a trap. Maybe silence was. Linda sat at her kitchen table long after the rain stopped, fingertips resting on her phone as though it were something fragile. Rachel's words echoed gently in her mind, loosening the tight knot that had kept her silent for so long. The apartment around her was dim, lit only by the small lamp near the couch, casting warm shadows across the room. She drew a slow breath, steadying herself the way she often steadied anxious parents in the newborn unit. Then, with a courage that felt small but genuine, she typed a single message. Coffee. Just as friends. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a long moment. The fear still clung to her, whispering the old doubts. Yet beneath it a steadier voice rose. A voice shaped by the memory of Samuel's calm presence, the kindness in his eyes, the patience in his messages. She tapped send before she could talk herself out of it. The reply came in less than a minute. Absolutely. You picked the place and the time. Linda pressed a hand to her chest, startled by the warmth that spread there. She chose a small coffee shop near the town library, a quiet spot with soft chairs and old books stacked in the corner. It felt safe. Neutral. Familiar. A place where two people could sit without demands. When she arrived 3 days later, the morning sunlight rested gently across the tables. She chose a seat near the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea she had barely sipped. She reminded herself over and over that she did not need to be perfect today. She only needed to show up. Samuel walked in a few minutes later. The moment he spotted her, relief softened his features. He crossed the room with a quiet smile, as though careful not to disrupt the fragile piece she was holding. When he reached her table, he did not ask why she had been silent. He did not press. He simply greeted her with a warmth that made her shoulders relax for the first time in days. They talked in soft tones at first, both careful, both gentle. Linda apologized for disappearing. Samuel shook his head before she even finished the sentence. No apology needed, he said softly. Sometimes life gets heavy. Sometimes people need quiet. I am just glad you are here today. The sincerity in his voice wrapped around her like a blanket. For a moment, Linda had to look down at her hands to steady herself. As they sat together, she confessed things she had not spoken aloud in years. She told him she had been skipping meals, sometimes eating too much in moments of stress, then feeling guilty afterward. She told him she had heard Mason's voice on loop in her mind, picking apart things she already felt insecure about. She said she was tired of feeling like she was either too much or not enough for the world around her. Samuel listened with complete presence, his brow furrowed, not in judgment, but in empathy. He leaned forward slightly, as though wanting to catch every word she spoke. After Mary passed away, he said, I heard her voice everywhere. Not her real voice. The one in my head that said I should have done more. That I should have noticed something was wrong sooner. That I should have saved her. But that voice was not her. It was my guilt pretending to be truth. Pain does that sometimes. It takes the harshest things we have ever heard or felt and convinces us they belong to us forever. Linda swallowed hard, her eyes warming at the gentle truth in his words. Healing is not neat, he continued. And it certainly is not quick. But you do not have to do it alone. A long breath left her. She felt seen. Not exposed, not judged, simply seen. The kind of seeing that brings a soft ache of relief. Over the next month, they met for coffee each week. They sat in different corners of that little shop, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in quiet moments that felt just as meaningful. On bright days, they walked slowly around the small park behind the library. On colder mornings, they lingered inside, warming their hands on mugs and sharing stories from their pasts. Linda slowly began to trust the quiet rhythm growing between them. She found that Samuel never pushed. He never asked for more than she could give. Some days she arrived cheerful. Other days she carried exhaustion or sadness. Samuel met each version of her with the same steady regard, as though each one was worthy of space and kindness. One morning, after a long shift at the hospital, Linda walked into the cafe with her hair pulled back loosely, dark circles under her eyes. She apologized for looking disheveled. Samuel gave a small, meaningful smile. You look tired, he said gently. That means you cared for people who needed you. That is not something to apologize for. Something inside Linda blossomed softly at those words. Then, one afternoon, as they were finishing their drinks, Samuel cleared his throat lightly. "Abby has been asking about you," he said. "She remembers your name. She wanted to know if you liked the drawing she made." Linda laughed softly. "Of course, I liked it. It made my whole day brighter." Samuel hesitated, then added, "We have dinner at Hearth and Harbor every Tuesday. It used to be something Mary loved. Abby and I kept the tradition after she passed. No pressure at all, but Abby asked if you might join us one evening." Linda's breath caught. Meeting his daughter felt like crossing into something deeper, something she did not take lightly. Yet the warmth in Samuel's voice, the way he honored her boundaries without stepping over them, felt like a lighthouse guiding her toward steadier ground. She met his gaze, her heart both nervous and hopeful. "Yes," she said quietly. "I would like that." Linda arrived early to Wallace Sands Beach on the afternoon she was meant to meet Abby. The shoreline stretched in a wide crescent, the pale sand dotted with smooth stones washed in by the gentle pull of the tide. Children ran along the water's edge, their laughter weaving through the salted breeze. Far off, a gull drifted lazily on an updraft, its wings outstretched, as if carried by memory alone. Linda wrapped her fingers around the strap of her bag, grounding herself while her heart thumped with a mixture of anticipation and nerves. Meeting a child is never a small thing, especially a child whose world has already known deep loss. Linda understood this well. She had spent years comforting new parents and tiny infants, but this felt different. This time she was stepping into a life already shaped by grief and resilience, a life held carefully by a father who loved deeply and quietly. She worried that Abby might not like her, or that her presence might feel like stepping into a space she had no right to enter. Yet she also knew that something inside her had softened the moment Samuel spoke Abby's name weeks earlier. It was a softness she could not ignore. She spotted Samuel and Abby before they saw her. The little girl walked ahead, skipping occasionally, her curls bouncing in the afternoon light. She carried a small bucket decorated with faded seashells. Samuel followed a few steps behind, hands in his pockets, his eyes warm and gentle as he watched his daughter chatter about something unseen. The sight of them together tugged at Linda's chest in a way both sweet and tender. When Abby finally noticed Linda, she stopped abruptly. Her eyes lit up bright and curious, and she bounded forward with the buoyant confidence only children possess. "You are Linda," she said, stopping just close enough to inspect her with earnest wonder. Linda nodded with a soft smile. "I am. And you must be Abby." Abby grinned, holding up her bucket proudly. "I am collecting stones that look like hearts," she said with delight. "Want to help me find some?" Linda blinked, touched by how easily the child pulled her into the circle of her world. "I would love to," she said. Abby reached for her hand without hesitation, guiding her toward a patch of sand dotted with small pebbles. Samuel approached them slowly, his smile quiet with gratitude. "She is excited you came," he said softly as they walked together. "She talked about it all morning." Linda felt her cheeks warm. "I was worried she might be shy." Samuel shook his head with a small, affectionate laugh. "Abby is only shy around people who make her uncomfortable. You are not one of them." The afternoon unfolded with an ease Linda could never have planned. Abby showed her how to look for heart-shaped stones, crouching low and brushing aside sand with serious concentration. Sometimes she would gasp dramatically when she found one, lifting it high like treasure. Linda knelt beside her, joining the search, feeling something calm and bright settle inside her. Moments like these had a way of reaching the deepest, loneliest corners of a heart. At one point, Abby handed Linda a tiny stone that barely resembled a heart. "This one is yours," Abby said matter-of-factly. "Even if it is not perfect, it is still special." Linda held the small stone, gently struck by the unexpected wisdom in the child's words. Then, Abby tugged at her sleeve. "Daddy likes you," she said simply. Linda's breath caught. She looked toward Samuel, who was skipping stones near the water, unaware of the conversation. Children had a way of seeing truth without covering it in fear or hesitation. Linda smiled softly and said, "I like your daddy too." Abby nodded, satisfied. "Good. My daddy smiles more when you are here." When Samuel returned, they walked along the water together. Abby chattered about her school art projects. Samuel listened with patient pride. Linda felt herself pulled into the gentle rhythm of their bond, the easy warmth that felt like coming home after a long journey. As the sun dipped lower, they sat on a large piece of driftwood. Abby leaned against her father, clutching her bucket of heartstones. Linda watched them, feeling an unfamiliar fullness in her chest. She had always imagined herself on the sidelines of family life, too uncertain, too bruised by past voices to fully trust in connection. Yet here she was, sitting beside two people who made the world feel softer. Samuel glanced toward her, his voice low. "Thank you for joining us today. I know meeting someone's child is not a small thing." Linda met his eyes, steady now. She felt the truth rise from a place deeper than fear. "I am glad I came. Truly." As they parted ways in the parking lot, Abby gave Linda a quick hug around the waist. "Come to dinner on Tuesday," she said. "Please." Linda looked to Samuel, who gave a small nod. His eyes carried something warm and grateful, a silent thank you for stepping gently into their lives. Linda returned home with a little heartstone tucked safely in her pocket. It felt like a symbol of something beginning. Small, imperfect, precious. Tuesday evening settled gently over Portsmouth, bringing with it the familiar hush that always wrapped around Hearth and Harbor Cafe as the sun dipped behind the harbor. The windows glowed with warm light, casting soft reflections onto the sidewalk. Inside, the low murmur of conversation blended with the comforting aromas of baked haddock, warm bread, and herbs simmering in the kitchen. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow, where people leaned into one another's company without hurry. For years, Tuesdays had belonged to Samuel and Abby. It began as a way to hold on to something after Mary passed, a small piece of routine to keep their hearts steady. Over time, it had become their quiet tradition, a weekly anchor filled with simple food and gentle laughter. Now, for the first time since they began the ritual, someone new was joining them. And both father and daughter felt the flutter of anticipation as they found their usual corner booth. Abby sat on the bench seat, swinging her feet happily while clutching her bucket of heart-shaped stones. She had brought it along just in case Linda wanted to see them again. Samuel smiled softly at his daughter's excitement, though he himself felt something deeper. A quiet hope, mixed with the steady caution of a man who had lived long enough to understand both joy and loss. Linda arrived with a soft breath of cool air from the doorway. She wore a simple blue blouse, nothing elaborate, just comfortable and warm. Yet when she stepped inside the cafe, something about her presence softened the room. Her eyes met Samuel's first, then Abby's eager expression. That small exchange of looks, warm and genuine, felt like a thread weaving itself into the fabric of something new. Abby waved her over with the enthusiastic joy only children possess. "Come sit next to me," she said, patting the bench with determination. Linda laughed gently and slid into the booth beside her, offering a warm greeting. The sight of the two of them sitting shoulder to shoulder made something loosen quietly in Samuel's chest. The waitress brought menus, though none of them really needed them. This place was familiar enough to feel like an extension of home. Linda looked around, taking in the rustic wooden beams, the framed photographs of local fishermen, the soft lanterns perched along the walls. She felt a sense of comfort settle over her, as though the room itself understood her need for gentleness. Abby launched into a lively explanation of her day at school, describing a drawing project and a classmate who declared that her lighthouse picture was the best in the room. Linda listened intently, asking small questions and offering encouraging smiles. The way she listened made Abby blossom even further, her little hands gesturing excitedly as she talked. Samuel watched them with quiet admiration. He had not expected the sight to move him the way it did, but something about the ease between Linda and Abby touched a tender place inside him, one he thought had closed with the passing of Mary. Seeing them together sharing laughter in their favorite booth filled him with a calm warmth. When their meals arrived, the plates steamed gently in the cozy lighting. Linda took her first bite, slowly savoring the familiar flavors. The haddock melted softly, seasoned with lemon and herbs, and for a moment she felt the same comforting stillness she had felt the night she first met Samuel. Food had a way of settling into the heart when shared with people who cared. Abby reached across the table, holding up one of her stones proudly. "This one is for you too," she said. "It is not shaped perfect, but Daddy says things do not have to be perfect to matter." Linda accepted the stone with care, touched by the child's generous heart. She looked at Samuel, who met her eyes with a gentle smile that said more than words ever could. As the evening went on, their conversation flowed with an easy rhythm. They talked about simple things like the best places in Portsmouth to watch the sunrise, and harder things like the weight of tired days. They laughed softly together. They shared comfortable silences too, the kind that appear when three people begin to feel like they belong at the same table. When the bill came, the owner approached their booth with his familiar warm smile. "You three stay as long as you want," he said kindly. "This table looks full of good company tonight." Then he winked at Abby. "That is the best kind of company there is." As they prepared to leave, Abby reached for Linda's hand. "Are you coming next Tuesday too?" she asked hopefully. Linda looked at Samuel, who gave a small nod filled with quiet invitation. Linda smiled and squeezed Abby's hand gently. "Yes," she said softly. "I would like that very much." Outside, the harbor air carried the faint scent of salt water and drifting pine. The night stretched ahead, calm and kind, and as Linda walked to her car, she felt something she had not felt in years. She felt wanted. She felt welcome. She felt the beginnings of a new chapter settling quietly into place. Tuesday dinners soon became a gentle thread woven through Linda's weeks, a rhythm that steadied her in ways she had not expected. Each visit to Hearth and Harbor left her carrying home a little more warmth, a little more courage. The green dress that once reminded her of Mason's cruelty now hung in her closet without that old heaviness. She found herself wearing brighter colors again, soft blues and warm yellows, colors she had long avoided because she feared drawing attention. Now she chose them because they made her feel alive. At the hospital, co-workers noticed she smiled more. Not the forced smiles she used to offer when exhaustion pressed against her, but real ones that touched her eyes. She moved with lighter steps through the newborn unit, humming softly under her breath while checking on infants, her voice steady and calm. Sometimes during her breaks, she found herself thinking about Abby's drawings or Samuel's quiet humor. Those thoughts brought a comfort she had not felt in years, as though little pieces of joy had begun stitching themselves into the fabric of her days. Change did not come all at once. Some mornings she still woke with the echo of old voices whispering that she was not enough. Some evenings she still caught herself counting the calories on her plate, or staring too long in the mirror searching for flaws like familiar landmarks. Yet when those moments came, she closed her eyes and remembered the soft way Abby had slipped her small hand into hers at the beach, or the steady way Samuel had listened to her without judgment. Slowly, those memories began to quiet the old doubts. On their Tuesday dinners, Linda noticed how easily she laughed now. Abby would chatter endlessly about her school adventures, proudly showing Linda her newest spelling quizzes or the latest stone she had found and declared magical. Linda found joy in the way Abby's eyes lit up when she spoke. There was something healing about being seen through a child's unfiltered affection, something that soothed wounds she had carried since her early years. Samuel, for his part, carried himself with the quiet strength Linda had noticed from the beginning. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and shared stories from his renovation projects with a gentle enthusiasm. He had a way of describing old houses as though they were old friends who simply needed a bit of care, and Linda loved hearing him talk about the work that helped him rebuild his own life after loss. She saw how deeply he loved his daughter, how every decision he made passed through the small but powerful filter of what would make Abby feel secure and cherished. She also began to notice the small ways he made room for her presence. When they sat down at their usual booth, he shifted slightly to make space without drawing attention to it. When Abby grew sleepy after dinner, resting her head briefly on Linda's shoulder, Samuel watched with a soft expression that spoke of gratitude more than anything else. Linda felt herself growing steadier around him. She found she could share thoughts she had tucked away for years, the ones she feared would make her seem too fragile or too complicated. Samuel never recoiled. He never offered sharp advice or easy answers. Instead, he met her honesty with his own. Tuesday by Tuesday, Linda began to reclaim herself. She found joy in simple things again, like the salt breeze brushing across her cheeks during her walks by the harbor or the familiar warmth of her favorite mug in the mornings. She learned to take deeper breaths. She learned to speak more gently to herself. She learned that she was allowed to take up space in her own life. One evening, after a particularly long shift at the hospital, Linda arrived at the cafe feeling worn thin. She slid into the booth with a quiet sigh, embarrassed by how drained she felt. Samuel noticed immediately, his brow softening. "Rough day," he murmured, his voice steady and warm. Linda nodded, unable to find the right words. Instead of asking for details, Samuel simply placed a cup of warm tea before her, something he had started ordering for her on tired evenings. Linda wrapped her hands around the cup, letting its heat settle into her fingers. She looked up at him, eyes heavy but grateful. In that moment, she realized something important. Being cared for did not require perfection. It did not require her to be cheerful or composed or dressed just the right way. It required only that she allow herself to be human. Abby, noticing her quietness, scooted closer on the bench and leaned lightly against her. "You look tired," Abby said gently. "I drew you something today at school. Maybe it will help." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and handed it to Linda with both hands. Inside was a crayon drawing of their little trio sitting at the booth together, smiling as though nothing in the world could trouble them. Linda felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from the warmth of being welcomed into a space she never thought she could belong. She traced the drawing lightly with her fingertip, then looked at Samuel, who met her gaze with a soft, knowing expression. In that quiet moment, Linda understood something deeper than any lesson she had learned in her years of nursing or in her past relationships. Healing does not always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it comes slowly, quietly, through steady kindness and shared meals, through laughter in a corner booth, through the gentle affection of a child who decides you belong in her world. Linda was changing, not into someone new, but back into the person she had always been beneath the fear. Samuel began to carry himself with a quieter kind of hope in the weeks that followed. It did not arrive with fanfare or sudden certainty. It grew slowly, the way dawn softens the edges of a long night. He had spent years rebuilding his world after losing Mary, placing each piece gently so it would not crumble under the weight of grief. When Linda entered his life, he did not expect her presence to fit so naturally into the spaces he had kept carefully guarded. Yet each Tuesday, each shared cup of tea, each soft conversation began to show him something he had not felt in a long while: the possibility of loving again. He did not rush the feeling. He did not name it too soon. Instead, he let it settle quietly, trusting that the heart knows when it is ready to stretch toward warmth once more. Linda noticed changes in him too. She saw how his eyes softened when she approached the booth, how he listened more intently when she spoke about her patients, how his laughter came more easily now. She saw how he shifted slightly when she sat down, creating a small, respectful closeness that felt both comforting and natural. She noticed how often their conversations drifted into gentle territory, not just the surface of daily events, but the quieter parts of life. Moments of doubt, moments of joy, memories that shaped them both. One evening, as they walked along the harbor after dinner, the sky painted in shades of lavender and rose, Samuel opened a piece of himself he had kept tucked away. He told her about the fear he had carried after Mary passed, the fear that caring deeply again might betray the memory of the woman he had loved so fiercely. He described nights when grief felt like a tide that would never recede. He admitted he had spent many months believing his heart would remain half-closed forever. Linda walked beside him quietly, letting the breeze carry the weight of his words. She did not rush to reassure him. She simply listened, her presence steady and warm. When he paused, she gently touched his arm, a gesture as light as the sea air. She told him that love does not replace what came before. It grows beside it, learning to honor all the pieces of a heart that has known both joy and sorrow. Samuel breathed deeply at her words, and something inside him settled with quiet understanding. Their closeness deepened in small, meaningful ways. Linda found herself sharing more about her own past. She spoke of the years she spent doubting her worth, how her former partner had chipped away at her confidence one comment at a time. She told Samuel how long it had taken to gather the courage to leave, how she still struggled with the echoes of his voice. Samuel listened with gentle attention, never looking away, never offering sharp corrections. Only compassion, only understanding. Some evenings brought laughter. Abby arrived with updates about school adventures, proudly showing her drawings or telling Linda about her latest discoveries along the shoreline. Linda's eyes always brightened when the child ran to greet her. The three of them often stood outside the cafe after dinner, sharing jokes or watching the harbor lights shimmer across the water. People walking by sometimes glanced at them, seeing only a father, a daughter, and a woman who seemed to fit naturally into their little circle. Other evenings brought deeper connection. Soft confessions shared over warm plates of food. Quiet moments when their hands brushed briefly on the table. Gentle glances that lingered just a little too long. Each moment added a small stitch to a bond growing strong and steady. One night, as they stepped out of the cafe, Samuel walked a few steps behind Linda and Abby. He watched the way Linda gently fixed a loose strand of Abby's hair, the way Abby reached for her hand without hesitation. The sight touched him profoundly. He felt something shift inside, something tender and unmistakable. He realized he was beginning to imagine a future where Linda stood beside them, not just on Tuesdays, but in all the days that followed. Yet with that realization came another truth. He needed to be certain. For himself, for Abby, for Linda. He needed to understand whether his growing feelings were born from loneliness or from genuine affection. He needed to seek clarity, not rush toward emotion simply because it felt comforting. The next morning, he called the counselor he had spoken to years earlier, scheduling a few sessions to explore his heart with honesty. It was a quiet decision, one he did not share with Linda yet. But it mattered to him that he entered any new chapter with intention, not fear. Meanwhile, Linda continued to change in her own way. The gentle acceptance she felt each week began to soften old insecurities. She no longer counted every bite of food at dinner. She no longer apologized for existing in quiet or tired moments. She found herself standing taller, smiling more readily, believing in small joys. She felt warmth blooming inside her with every soft exchange of words, every shared glance. Every moment Samuel treated her with kindness that came without conditions. Neither of them said aloud what was shifting between them. They did not label the quiet tenderness taking root. Instead, they moved through their days with growing steadiness, each carrying a deepening affection that felt honest, patient, and carefully nurtured. Something was forming. Something fragile yet strong. Something that came not from filling emptiness, but from recognizing a companion in the journey of healing. Linda's life had begun to stretch into something gentler, yet even gentle seasons carry their own tests. One quiet Sunday morning, while sunlight drifted softly across her small kitchen, her phone rang with a familiar Oklahoma area code she had not seen in months. The moment she saw it, a small weight settled in her chest. She answered anyway, bracing herself. Her mother's voice came through the line, warm but tinged with the firm insistence Linda had grown up with. She spoke of the farm back home, the aging fence that needed repairs, the doctor appointments that were becoming more frequent, the long evenings she spent alone. The conversation began with small talk, but Linda sensed the real purpose long before her mother spoke it plainly. "I think it's time you came home," her mother said, her voice steady. "I'm not getting any younger, and it would be good to have you near. You're all I've got here. You know that." The words landed with the familiar pull Linda had wrestled with for years. Duty. Expectation. The quiet guilt that had followed her since she left Oklahoma to build a life of her own in New Hampshire. She loved her mother deeply, but their relationship had always been built on an unspoken agreement that Linda would bend a just sacrifice when needed, that she would never say no. Now, with her mother's request sitting heavy between them, Linda felt a tightening inside her chest. She murmured that she would think about it, though the words tasted both truthful and painful. After she hung up, she sat very still, letting the quiet settle around her. For the first time in many months, old doubts crept into her mind. Was she being selfish by staying in Portsmouth? Was it wrong to build something warm and steadier here, far from the childhood home that shaped her? She stood at the kitchen counter, turning the small, heart-shaped stone Abby had given her weeks earlier. Its uneven edges reminded her that life rarely formed perfect answers. That Tuesday at dinner, Linda arrived quieter than usual. Samuel noticed the moment she sat down, the gentle slump in her shoulders, the faraway look in her eyes. Abby noticed too and scooted close, resting her head lightly against Linda's arm. Linda smiled at the child, grateful for the simple comfort. Samuel waited until Abby was showing the waitress her latest drawing before leaning slightly closer. "Something is weighing on you," he said softly. Linda hesitated, then let out a slow breath. "My mother wants me to move back home. She says she needs me. She says it's time." Samuel nodded gently, giving her space to continue if she wished. Linda told him about the family farm, about the long tradition of daughters, staying close, about the guilt she carried from moving across the country. She told him how torn she felt, now that she had begun to find real steadiness here, something she had not felt in years. She spoke of duty and longing, of fear and hope. Samuel listened without interruption, his eyes steady with understanding. When she finished, he spoke in the quiet tone he used when truth needed to be given room to breathe. "Love for a parent is real," he said, "and so is the desire to build a life that belongs to you. Those two things don't cancel each other. They just sit beside one another, asking for balance." Linda felt her throat tighten. "I'm afraid that choosing one means abandoning the other." Samuel shook his head gently. "Choices you make from care are not abandonment. They are simply choices made with a full heart. You can support your mother without giving up the life you are building here. You can love her and still love yourself enough to stay where you feel steady. You do not have to disappear to be a good daughter." Linda felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever said it that clearly before. Abby slid back into the booth, then placing a new drawing between them. It showed 3 people standing on the shoreline, holding hands beneath a bright sun. Linda felt something warm, pressed gently against the ache inside her. Later that week, Linda called her mother again. Her voice trembled at first, but she spoke with honesty she had never dared to use before. She explained that she loved her deeply, but that her life now was here. She promised to visit more often, to call regularly, to help in the way she could from afar. Her mother was quiet for a long moment, then sighed softly. "I suppose children grow wings whether mothers are ready or not." When Linda hung up, she covered her face with both hands, letting relief wash slowly over her. It had taken courage she wasn't sure she had yet. She had chosen a path that honored both love and her own growing sense of self. That Tuesday, when she met Samuel and Abby again, she felt lighter. Not because the decision had been easy, but because it had been true. Abby had always been a bright child, the kind whose laughter rose easily and whose curiosity bloomed in every direction. But like many children who carried quiet memories of loss, she was sensitive in ways others did not always see. Linda noticed it first one Tuesday evening when Abby walked into the cafe with her shoulders a little tighter, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She sat beside Linda without her usual burst of stories, gently tracing circles on the wooden table with one finger. Samuel watched his daughter with quiet concern. "Rough day?" he asked softly. Abby shrugged, her small frame sinking a little deeper into the bench. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and placed it on the table, pushing it toward Linda without a word. Linda opened it carefully. The drawing showed a group of children on a playground. One figure stood alone, its head bowed while a taller figure pointed at it. The colors were darker than Abby's usual bright suns and lighthouses. Linda felt a small ache open in her chest. "Who pointed at you, sweetheart?" Linda asked gently, keeping her voice soft so Abby would not feel pressured. "A boy in my class," Abby murmured, her voice small. "He said my hair was messy. He said I dress weird. He said I don't have a real mom to fix things before school." Her eyes glistened. "I didn't know what to say." Samuel exhaled slowly, pain crossing his face. Linda reached for Abby's hand, her touch warm and steady. "Having a real mom is about love," she said softly. "Not about hair or clothes. And you are surrounded by people who love you very much." Abby leaned closer to Linda, her small fingers curling around Linda's. "Do you think I'm weird?" she asked in a trembling voice. Linda shook her head with gentle certainty. "I think you're wonderful. I think you're brave. And I think you are exactly who you are meant to be." The child rested her head against Linda's arm, letting out a breath she had been holding all day. Samuel watched the moment unfold with a quiet awe that touched something deep inside him. He had tried so hard to protect Abby from the sharp corners of the world, yet even the gentlest parents could not shield every wound. Seeing Linda comfort her with such tenderness made his heart tighten in ways both grateful and profound. When their meals arrived, Abby picked at her food, still weighed down by the day. Linda waited until the child was absorbed in arranging her heart-shaped stones on the table before leaning slightly toward Samuel. "Bullying leaves deeper marks than most people realize," she whispered. "It sneaks into self-worth. It can linger for years." Samuel nodded, his expression full of worry. "I know," he murmured. "I just hate that she had to face that alone." Linda reached across the table, her hand resting lightly near his. "She will not face it alone now." The following week, Linda asked if she could pick Abby up from school with Samuel. When Abby spotted her, her eyes widened with surprise and relief. She rushed into Linda's arms as though the weight she had been carrying had suddenly become too heavy to hold. Linda knelt down to eye level and spoke softly. "I heard what happened last week. If that boy says anything again, you come find me or your father. You are allowed to speak up. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to know your worth." Abby nodded, her little chin trembling slightly. Together, the three of them walked to the car, the autumn leaves swirling around their feet. The afternoon sun cast warm light over them, painting the sidewalk in gold. Over the next several days, Linda worked quietly with Abby to help her rebuild confidence. She taught her small breathing exercises to use when she felt overwhelmed. She helped her practice gentle but firm responses she could use if someone made an unkind comment. They made it a game, a practice of courage rather than fear. When Abby returned to school with her head held a little higher, her teachers noticed. They told Samuel she seemed steadier, more sure of herself. Samuel listened with a mix of pride and gratitude. He knew Linda had played a large part in that shift. One Tuesday, as they sat in their usual booth, Abby pressed a small drawing into Linda's hands. It showed three figures standing side by side. The smallest one had a big smile and curly hair. The middle one wore a blue blouse. The tallest one had familiar, warm brown eyes. Above them, in Abby's careful handwriting, were the words, "My family." Linda felt her heart catch. She looked at Samuel, who held her gaze for a long, quiet moment that said everything. "You helped her," he said softly. "More than you know." Linda brushed a gentle tear from her cheek. "She helped me too." The evening unfolded with laughter and warm conversation, the kind that fills a room with gentle familiarity. Abby ate her meal with renewed joy, occasionally leaning against Linda's shoulder with easy affection. By the time they stepped outside into the cool night, something had changed. It was subtle, but certain. They were no longer just a man, a woman, and a child sharing Tuesday dinners. They were beginning to move toward something deeper, something shaped not only by kindness and connection, but by the small, brave ways they were learning to hold one another's hearts. Spring arrived quietly in Portsmouth that year, touching the harbor with soft breezes and scattering pale blossoms along the sidewalks. The gentle shift of the season seemed to mirror the changes taking place in Linda's life, changes that had taken root slowly, tenderly, like flowers learning to bloom after a long winter. Healing does not always arrive in grand moments. Sometimes it grows through steady days filled with small kindnesses until one morning, the heart realizes it has grown strong enough to love without fear. By the time 6 months had passed since that hard Tuesday at Hearth and Harbor, Linda felt different in ways both delicate and profound. She no longer searched for flaws in her reflection each morning. She no longer measured her worth through the careless voices of her past. Instead, she found comfort in simple routines. Tea in her favorite mug, walks along the harbor after work, laughter with Abby as they sorted through her box of heart-shaped stones, and quiet evenings when Samuel talked softly about his renovation projects, his voice carrying warmth that settled gently around her. Her life had grown fuller, steadier, and somewhere within that quiet fullness, love began to rise. She did not notice it all at once. Love appeared in the way her heart lifted when she saw Abby running across the sand toward her. It showed itself in the calm she felt whenever Samuel sat down beside her, offering comfort without expecting anything in return. It bloomed in the gentle warmth of their shared silences, moments where words were unnecessary and presence was enough. The turning point came one Tuesday evening when Abby was home with a cold and Samuel arrived at the cafe alone. Linda saw him step inside, shoulders slightly tense, as though he felt the space beside him too empty without his daughter's chatter. When he reached their booth, she noticed something in his eyes, something uncertain yet full of hope. "I have something to tell you," he said softly, his voice warm but trembling with honesty. "I have been talking with someone, working through the pieces of my heart. I needed to understand what I am feeling, whether it comes from loneliness or something truer. And I want you to know what I learned." Linda felt her breath pause, her hands resting quiet on the table. "I am falling for you," he said, his voice steady now. "Not because Abby needs you, not because I miss what I lost, not because I want to fill an empty place. I am falling for you because when you are near, the world feels gentle again. Because you understand the weight of grief and the strength it takes to keep moving. Because you make my days lighter just by being in them. But I also know you have been hurt. I know trust is not easy after what you lived through. So I want you to choose this only if you feel ready. No pressure. No rush. Just truth." Linda felt her eyes warm, the tender ache of being seen settling deep in her chest. For a long moment she could not speak. Then she reached for his hand, resting her fingers lightly over his. "I am scared," she said softly. "Not of you. Of believing I deserve something good. Every past voice told me I was too much or not enough. But you and Abby have shown me something different. With you, I want to be brave. I want to trust what is growing here. I want to choose this. And I do." A long, quiet breath left Samuel as though a weight he had carried for years had finally eased. Their first kiss happened right there in the soft glow of Hearth and Harbor, a warm and tender joining of two hearts that had waited a long time for safe ground. The owner smiled knowingly from across the room, wiping his counter with the gentle satisfaction of a man who had watched many love stories unfold within those wooden walls. A few diners glanced over with small smiles, sensing the quiet miracle taking place at the corner booth. From that night forward, their lives wove gently together. A year later, Samuel proposed in the calm light of the harbor, with Abby holding a small ring box painted with seashells. He asked Linda, not just to marry him, but to join the little family they had built together, a family shaped by both sorrow and hope. They were married the following spring in a small ceremony on the beach. Abby wore her favorite pale blue dress, twirling in the sand as Linda brushed a stray curl from her forehead. Samuel stood beneath a simple arch of driftwood and flowers, his eyes soft with gratitude as he took Linda's hands in his. Their vows were quiet, full of honesty and tenderness, promising to honor both the joys and the shadows that had shaped their journey. Years passed and their family grew. Abby blossomed into a young girl who defended classmates with the same fierce kindness Linda had once shown her. 2 little boys joined the household, filling it with laughter and chaos and small, muddy footprints. On Tuesdays, the whole family still gathered at Hearth and Harbor, filling the corner booth with stories of school and work and the small victories of daily life. Sometimes Linda still felt old doubts rise, the lingering echoes of voices that once made her shrink inside herself. But Samuel would wrap his arms around her from behind, whispering softly that her heart was strong, her kindness rare, her presence cherished. Abby would tug at her hand, reminding her with a child's simple truth that she belonged exactly where she was. And on days when Samuel felt the ache of old grief, missing Mary's gentle spirit, Linda understood. She made room for those memories at their table, honoring them without fear. She knew that love does not erase what came before. It grows beside it, gentle and steady, weaving past and present into something whole. Their story spread quietly through Portsmouth. People spoke of the couple who had met because one moment of cruelty had been answered with courage. They spoke of the woman who found her worth again and the man who learned that the heart could heal without forgetting. They spoke of a child who gained not a replacement mother but a second love. If anyone ever asked how 2 broken hearts found their way to each other, Linda always answered the same way. Healing begins the moment kindness meets wounded places. And Samuel would add, love grows strongest in lives brave enough to stay open. Their Tuesdays became a symbol of that truth. A reminder that sometimes the hardest nights lead to the gentlest tomorrows. A reminder that every life holds the possibility of being chosen, cherished, and seen with a kindness deep enough to spark a new beginning.